After Moody's, rating agency S&P has also affirmed India's credit rating at BBB- with a stable outlook. This as S&P expects the Indian economy to normalize in the next financial year. It believes that India's contraction due to COVID and the lockdowns will be followed by a significant recovery. However, S&P has also said that it may cut India's rating if growth remains significantly below its estimate after FY22. Lata joins us now to take us through the fine print. Lata, so good news coming in there for now for India from S&P. But what's the growth estimate that S&P is working with?
Yes, it's certainly we have survived one hurdle because at BBB- we are at the lowest rung of the investment grade. Below that, you go into junk status. So the fact that you're retained there is important. Actually, nobody was expecting a downgrade because this is an unusual time and rating agencies will not be forgiven if they did that. And the other point working in favor of India is an extremely favorable external balance. We will be running into the lowest current account deficit according to S&P in decades, probably minus 0.6% or thereabouts. So considering on the external front it is very safe, they feel emboldened to keep the rating. But rest of the forecasts, I'll just rattle out the growth forecasts. We already know they expect a minus 9.9, almost a minus 10% this year, which will be reversed with a plus 10% next year. Obviously, out of a low base, they're expecting a plus 10. And thereafter, the economy moderates to a 6% and a 6.2%. So we don't get to 7, but 6% is also pretty charitable because there are a lot of people who believe that India may not get even to 6% after this deep downturn. Deficits 12.5% this year. So obviously, S&P is not assuming any fiscal package. 12.5 is as the deficit we know now. And next year, they expect it to moderate to 10%, the deficit, and then 8.8, and then 8%. Now, what the observations they make are very important. They say banking system has liquidity, but credit conditions will remain tight. NBFCs are not able to lend, and the government is not able to provide a stimulus because it has already entered into the COVID with weak fiscal balances. So growth triggers in future years become weak. They point out that India is still an outperformer compared to other countries in the same BBB- rating. But the difference is narrowing because India's growth pace has become weaker. It's no longer that 7% kind of growth. Even with S&P 6%, the difference narrows, and they expect the current year's debt to GDP at 90%. Remember, NK Singh committee was speaking about 85%. S&P believes it will be 90% debt to GDP. And going by the fiscal deficit and growth forecasts that they are giving, it looks like we will be at a debt to GDP of 90 to 95% for a few years now.
Well, joining us now to discuss a whole host of issues from the farm bills to the GST compensation impasse is Mr. T.S. Singhdeo. Mr. Singhdeo, thanks very much for joining us here on CNBC TV 18. Let me begin by asking you about the farm bills. Many Congress-ruled states have decided to oppose the government's decision to pass the farm bills in Parliament. What is the situation in Chhattisgarh? And more importantly, what is the way forward? States like Kerala are now talking about the possibility of moving the Supreme Court against the passage of these bills. Is that something that you would consider as well?
We would have to take all options in mind and act accordingly. First would be to ensure the minimum support price. Today, Randeep Singh Ji Surjewala, he brought this forward where in the report to the Working Group on Consumer Affairs, Mr. Narendra Modi himself as Chief Minister of Gujarat, in 2011, the point was B3 of his report to the Consumer Council, where he clearly mandated that enforce MSP. Since intermediaries play a vital role in the functioning of the market and at times they have advanced contract with farmers. In respect of all essential commodities, we should protect farmers' interests by mandating through statutory provisions that no farmer-trader transaction should be below MSP wherever prescribed. So this is what Randeep ji put forward before the nation today on behalf of the Congress party. And it is unambiguous where a chief minister, as chief minister, has a view, and as a prime minister is not willing to live up to his own commitment towards, supposedly a commitment towards farmers.
Right.
So this is the issue. Farmers and farming would collapse if you are going to impose the Shanta Kumar committee and take away 80,000 to 1 lakh crores from the amount that the farmers get by removing the MSP.
Yeah.
Will the farming community survive?
Mr. Singh, the government's argument is that they are not doing away with the MSP, neither is the APMC infrastructure being done away with. This is only a means to ensure that there is also private participation, increased private participation. And let's be clear, there is already private participation in the agriculture space. There are many e-mandis that already procure from farmers directly. So do you not believe that there can be a happy coexistence between the old and the new with whatever safeguards that you want in place?
Most certainly, if the MSP is ensured, what happens in the mandis is that when a farmer goes, whatever taxes or dues are there, which are nominal, so to say, the rest of the MSP is ensured to the farmer. Now, when he goes to the private purchaser in the market, how will you ensure MSP? That is the point of contention. The modality is not a point of contention. The Congress had brought forward in its manifesto 22 points on this. 22 points on this, where they said that every 3 kilometers there should be a purchase point. So the point is not of decentralizing the purchasing mechanism. The point is of ensuring MSP. At every point, every 3 kilometers, the Congress would have visualized that the farmer would not have to carry his produce 60 kilometers away. And on that 3 kilometer point, they would be ensured the minimum support price. So that is what it is about, not the decentralizing of the structure.
Okay, so what now, sir? You said that you are exploring all options. Is there going to be something that will be passed by the State Assembly? That is something that we are hearing, the state of Punjab, the likelihood of that happening. Will you move court? What is the next step now?
All options. For example, is not agriculture in the 7th schedule of the Constitution a subject of the state government within the state boundaries? In the central list of the 7th schedule, I think it is mentioned as point 42, that the central government would have the authority to ensure interstate movement of goods. So where is that being stopped? In the concurrent list in point 33 is where they are trying to use the concurrent list to supersede the state list. Mentions on point 24 and 26 clearly gives the power to the state governments to ensure farm produce marketing and commerce.
Okay.
So on every point, whether it is GST or otherwise, if you are going to supersede the rights of the states, then where does our federal structure go?
Okay, so you said all options are open, but no decision has been taken yet. Mr. Singh, let me move away from the farm bills to talk about the other impasse, and that is over GST compensation. There are two issues that I wish to discuss with you. Will you bring up the issue of what the CAG has said on GST? The CAG has brought up the issue of short crediting. It has brought up the issue of the IGST. It has said that the funds collected under the Compensation Act have not necessarily all been used to provide compensation to states. Is this going to be an issue that you as member of the GST Council will bring up?
We will certainly partake in the discussions on that. When the IGST was introduced, the government of India put the amount in the Consolidated Fund of India, whereas what they should have done with their share was to treat it as central revenue and devolve 42% to the states. So that is the issue, and the issue raised in the CAG report is about how much of that 42% or less or more has gone to the states. So we will certainly look into that, and whatever are the provisions as per law, we are not the ones bucking the law or the constitutional provisions. It is they who are always trying to take out methods. So whatever is constitutionally or provided by Act,
Okay.
we'll certainly be on board on
Now,
that.
what about the issue of the GST compensation, sir? Because according to government sources, 21 states have decided to go along with the first option of the two formulas that were proposed by the centre. States like Chhattisgarh, Rajasthan, Punjab have said no to either of the options. Given the fact that now it looks like 21 states are in favour of option one, is it a done deal? Will that go through?
If majoritarianism holds, then anything will go through. If bills like this in the Rajya Sabha can go through, putting aside the constitutional provision of right to call a division. If the right to call a division of the members is put aside by the government in power, then anything they can do anything on the strength of supposed numbers in Parliament at this particular point in time. So similarly in the GST Council.
So if it were to come down to it, sir, it seems at this point in time that option one is going to be the option that will go through. The state of Chhattisgarh will have to comply.
We certainly hope it doesn't come to that. And there was a communication from the Kerala Finance Minister, GST Minister, Mr. Isaac in the morning. And he is wanting to convene a meeting of video conferencing of the concerned ministers to try and see what the views are.
Okay.
So we'll be meeting over video conferencing.
When is that meeting, sir? You said that Mr. Isaac has proposed a meeting. When is it?
Probably 28th or 29th. I'll confirm the date to you.
Okay.
But just this morning we had a conversation.
Okay.
So that is welcome, and then we'll strategize.
Okay. Let me end then by asking you, sir, I had a conversation with the chairman of the 15th Finance Commission, Mr. N.K. Singh. They have to submit their report by the 30th of October. Now, he was very clear that while states are demanding that devolution be as high as 50%, the centre has made it clear that given the fiscal situation, it should be below 42%. Now, if that were to be the recommendation of the Finance Commission, the devolution is below the current 42%, what will the strategy be?
I think Mr. Modi should answer that, because he went to the media and the country saying, thumping his chest and saying, I've raised it from 32 to 42. This is what Mr. Modi told the country. So
Yes.
Everything he says at a point in time, and if he wants to retract and take that back and
But this is for the next 5 years, sir. This is the 42%
Yes.
has been given for this 5 years. This is now the recommendation for the next 5 years.
Yes, but it should be kept in mind, because this is what devolution is about. And particularly when many schemes which were sponsored by the central government were withdrawn. So there were many untied funds which were given, or many projects which had been taken through central funding when the devolution was 32%.
Okay.
When it was raised to 42%, those schemes funding was removed. So actually there was not much of a difference.
Okay.
So now with those schemes in abeyance, if you go on reducing the percentage to the state, why remove the percentage? The amounts will come down automatically if there is a slowdown in the economy. Why play with the percentages?
All right, Mr. Singhdeo, we will leave it there. Appreciate you joining us here on CNBC TV 18. Thanks very much for speaking to us on a whole host of issues. In a major victory for Vodafone, the company has won the landmark retrospective tax case amounting to 20,000 crore rupees against India in the International Court. The Permanent Court of Arbitration in Netherlands, The Hague, has ruled that the conduct of the Indian Tax Department is in breach, and I quote, of fair and equitable treatment. Ashmit Kumar joins us now with more on this landmark ruling. Ashmit, a big win for Vodafone. More than a decade that this matter has been alive.
In fact, this issue coincides with the very entry of Vodafone in the Indian market. In fact, that's the very transaction that the tax department had used to, in fact, call a tax avoidance scheme, and had consequently slapped a tax demand of 20,000 crore rupees. The issue here, however, is not so much the tax demand, but the retrospective tax demand that had been raised. Keep in mind that in 2012, the Supreme Court had held this issue to be in favor of Vodafone. However, we saw a retrospective tax amendment which allowed the tax department to tax this transaction and raise that bill of 20,000 crore once again, which is what led to this arbitration. And that is something that the arbitral tribunal in Netherlands, in Hague, seems to have taken exception to. The Hague tribunal, the arbitral tribunal holding that the conduct of the Indian tax department is not in keeping with principles of fair and equitable treatment that have been assured under the bilateral investment treaty that is signed between the two countries. It's a bilateral treaty between the Netherlands and India. It is not in conformity with the norms laid down as far as investment protection goes. That is one key observation. Further, the arbitral tribunal also held that Vodafone is eligible for protection under this very same scheme, and that the Indian tax department, the Indian authorities, ought to cease their current course, cease their current conduct. That's a very, very clear direction that's coming with respect to the Indian tax authorities. So no questions asked. This is a big, big win for Vodafone. It's been a landmark issue. It's been a legacy issue going forward. And clearly Vodafone at this point coming out on top. So we'll of course have to see how this case moves forward on whether or not the Indian government accepts this verdict coming in from the arbitral tribunal.
Well, we haven't heard from the Indian government. No reaction yet on the arbitration award that's come in. Thanks very much, Ashmit, for joining us. Joining me now is Dinesh Kanabar of Dhruva Advisors. Do you believe, sir, that this will finally lay to rest the ghost of the retrospective tax, Mr. Kanabar, which, by the way, continues to exist in law?
So I think, having been associated closely with this matter as I have been, we saw a journey where a show cause notice was challenged, winning all the way up to the Supreme Court upholding the view taken by Vodafone that although this is a transaction which was dealing with India, the law as it stood at that point of time did not allow the tax authorities to tax the transaction. And again, remember, the income, if any, was to be taxed in the case of Hutch, Vodafone's liability was really to withhold taxes, and the tax office went after Vodafone. And I think and I was quite sort of seeing live the entire thing about retrospective amendment coming, and I couldn't believe my ears that this is what India was doing, because one of the things which has been always appealing to a foreign investor is that while it takes time to reach a conclusion for justice in India, you do get justice at the end of it. So people would say it takes 10, 15 years, whatever, to get a matter. But when you get the final judgment, the judgment is always fair. And that's what Supreme Court gave as a judgment. And it should have been accepted by everybody. And then when you bring on a clarificatory amendment to say, we always meant this right from 1961, as this is how the law should be, you're actually undermining judiciary and the faith that the investors have to say that India can provide a transparent tax system about which we are talking. And you're right, Shirin. Both Mr. Jaitley and thereafter the current FM have repeatedly reassured people that there will not be a future retrospective amendment, but nobody went ahead and withdrew this. And then the matter went to the international court. And the matter before the international court was at a much, much broader level. Not whether retrospective amendment is right or wrong, but as to whether if India was changing its laws after an investment was made, should the investor be appropriately compensated or not? And that's what the international court has held. And I do hope and wish that this matter is resolved, because it was, of course, India's view that an international court cannot decide on an Indian tax matter. This was one bilateral investment treaty which did not exclude tax from within its purview. And I do hope it gets accepted and we are finally able to exercise the ghost of this controversy.
Yes, let's hope that we are able to exercise the ghost of this controversy, Mr. Kanabar. But given the fact that the arbitration award is gone now in favour of Vodafone, we haven't heard from the Indian government yet. There has been no response from Revenue on what will happen post this arbitration award. But what would your best guess be?
Very difficult to prophesize that, Shirin, but I can give you one example in the case of Vodafone itself. And I don't know whether you will remember, but you had made a phone call to me after the Vodafone won in the Bombay High Court on the share premium issue. And I said that this issue was so frivolous that for once the court should accept the Bombay High Court judgment and not go to Supreme Court. And you had laughed to say, Dinesh, but that never happens. And it did happen, where the cabinet actually came back to say, although the amounts involved are staggering, really this issue has no merit, let's just bury it. And I do hope such saner counsels prevail this time also.
Yes, let us hope that, as you point out, the ghost of this retrospective tax is exorcised with this arbitration award. Mr. Kanabar, always a pleasure. Appreciate you joining us here with your take on what has been the big story of this evening. With that, it is time for us to wrap up this edition of Reporter's Diary. Thanks very much for watching. Do stay tuned. We're back in a moment.